All right, welcome everybody to our latest Live Motocross podcast as we talk all things AMA Supercross ahead of Pittsburgh and speak some MXGP with Jason Thomas. Obviously, firstly, thank you everyone for listening and supporting the site. We really appreciate it. We'd also like to thank our sponsor for this one in Fly Racing. Fly Racing is aimed to provide customers with the very best in off-road performance products, led by the revolutionary Formula S Smart Helmet. Fly Racing continues to push innovation in safety to new levels. Never before has style and technology blended together so seamlessly as the 2025 Fly Racing lineup. For more info, check out flyracing.com, your local dealers. Also, follow Fly Racing Global on social media and cheer for all the Fly Racing riders in the SMX World Championship and in MXGP. All right, JT, thanks again for joining us, mate. How's life in the busy schedule? It's certainly barely halfway yet, but you're doing a bloody good job, mate. So, how are you?
Yeah, thanks. I can't complain. It's a lot going on. We just feel like it just not just me, but everybody kind of in this same schedule is very repetitive right now. You come home, you do the same things, you put clothes in the laundry and take them out, put them right back in, and it's like you try to check all these boxes before you get back on the airplane to head off somewhere else. So again, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love every second of it, but yeah, I mean, I think it weighs on everyone a little differently at different times. But yeah, it's part of it. Thankfully, the flights will become a little bit shorter for me soon, that's definitely a big part of the equation, I think, as far as burnout levels and all that stuff.
Yeah, mate, it's a hectic schedule you got going on. Another big flight ahead of Pittsburgh. But before we get cracking on that, just a great weekend for fly racing, especially in the MXGP and MX2 with Kuhn and Langenfelder winning, mate, in Switzerland. Really awesome. Obviously, Webb, RJ doing their thing in East Rutherford as well. So really great weekend for fly overall. You and the team must be stoked.
Yeah, it was that was huge. Like we've been doing well in America, and I think we're getting a little numb to it. Webb has just been so consistent and great. RJ's gotten a lot of podium coverage for us. So we're very thankful. But this yeah, the MXGP side, whether it's MX2 with Simon or obviously Sasha, like it was just long overdue as far as like what our effort level has been and what we've hoped for so long kind of finally came to fruition. So it was a pretty magical Monday for us, to be honest.
Yeah, mate, you would have got into the office and been pretty pumped seeing that win for sure. And yeah, obviously the East Rutherford Supercross, obviously all our best to Jerry Robin. Wish him all the best for his recovery. That was absolutely brutal what happened to him. And it's really nice to see a lot of motocross industry people, riders, figures are all, offering their support. They got the Road to Recovery. You got Steve with the Privateer Challenge with Chiz, that little cool thing they've got going on there. Whiskey Throttle donating some money through like a golf day. That'll be awesome. But yeah, it's really great. People get behind him, but just such a brutal thing to happen to him, mate. Whole life's work, doing so well, so young, putting into that motocross career. Just absolutely, tragic. So I wish him all the best. And like you said on one of your podcasts this week, it's the worst fear of all riders, isn't it? Something like that happening.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's ever raced at any level, doesn't even have to be professional, but we all know that there's a chance that happens. We all know the risk we're assuming, but it doesn't make it any less tragic when it happens. And yeah, what can you say? It unfortunately is not the first person we've seen this happen to, and I mean, it's not going to be the last. It's just the worst part of the sport that we all love is these catastrophic injuries like this. So hoping for the best for him, hoping for, a miracle to be done. Modern medicine is a pretty amazing thing. So you just hope that with the new procedures they have and therapies they have, I know I heard that surgery went about as well as they could have asked for as far as the spinal cord being intact. In any case, it's going to be a really long road for him moving forward. And yeah, you just wish him the best. What else can you really do? It's a really tough deal.
Yeah, well said, mate. Absolutely. That track was certainly pretty brutal. Like you were there in person, mate, doing some of those sections and doing the expert commentary. Like it was quite peaky. Wasn't a huge amount of room for error compared to some other tracks. The transitions were pretty gnarly. So I guess just your take on it all, mate. And obviously we spoke last week and you said the two whoops would be absolutely pivotal. And so it proved, mate, with Chase getting the job done emphatically. So just a few words on the whoops, the track. Chase, anything else from East Rutherford, mate? It was a pretty interesting night of racing for sure.
Yeah, it was you know, you look at tracks and been doing this for a long time, studying these racetracks on the front end because not necessarily because I want to. It's I write a column for Racer X every week where I break it down. And to be fair, I don't get super in depth with my analysis when I'm writing, but in my head, I do because I think you can kind of glean trends and you can have an idea of what's likely to happen. And if it's racing, so if you try to think you're going to be sure of something, racing will make you look foolish very quickly. But I think if you know what rider strengths and weaknesses are and where they have done well in the past, and you just kind of build this, um, you can paint a picture of what's likely to happen for each rider because of the variables involved. And I like to think of it as confluence. If you have a certain type of dirt with certain type of obstacles and a certain start setup and all these things, and you start to check all these boxes, well, then I think you can draw a parallel and say this rider should have a good weekend. If he doesn't, have some sort of unforced error, the setup is pretty good for him. And that's not always the case, but I think this weekend when I looked at the layout, the whoops just really stood out to me. And it wasn't just Chase. It was, it would have been a healthy Ken Roczen, but he's not to form right now. But I thought Malcolm had a good opportunity there. Certainly Jet and Eli would have, but it comes down to just the riders that are really good at blitzing whoops, and they know in their heart that blitzing whoops at speed is a skill set that they should be wielding each weekend. And especially when you factor in for Chase, who knows that Cooper Webb is not he doesn't want to see that, right? And it's not doesn't mean he's not capable of executing them. He just knows as well as Chase, they both know the same thing that if Cooper had the choice, he would never have that type of setup on a racetrack. Like they both know that it is a liability for Cooper and it is a strength for Chase. So anytime you start on the front end with that setup, you have to take that into account. And if you're not, I think you're throwing out a huge variable as to how the race can go. Now, if I was making a highlight reel of my predictions, this would be on it because I knew this could be a thing, but it turned out to be the thing. Like you didn't need anything else. Like I could have just said, "Yep, two sets of whoops. The lead into the first set, Chase Sexton's going to absolutely dominate here. Drop the microphone and walk away," and I would have looked like a hero. Now I didn't think that was going to happen. I was just looking for small nuances where Chase could make a difference. That's it, right? And it could have been 2/10 of a second that would offset some other section that Coop had dialed in. And you could see it lap after lap where, Coop was leading and Chase would close in right there and the Coop would pull. I thought it would be more something like that, not this glaring race defining thing. I just kind of got lucky with that take, but I think there are little things like that on most tracks where you can start to look and see like, okay, this is a really good setup. And where I'm going with that is, I look at Pittsburgh this coming weekend, and there are certain things about this racetrack that I think set up well for certain people. The start is incredibly long this weekend. It's the longest start of the year. Glendale wasn't quite as long as normal this year. So this is what I think is the longest start of the year. It's literally from one end of the stadium to the other. So for a guy like Justin Cooper, it's a really nice setup for him because he really likes to get on the outside, get out amongst lesser riders. And I'm not trying to say they just don't have the skill, especially on the starts, that Justin Cooper has. So he wants to get out there with them, get the jump, and really just hammer down. And the upside of that is he's not elbowing other factory guys on incredibly good equipment all the way down, right? So he's not having to double clutch or disengage the clutch or fight and lean and all those things. Like he is in pure acceleration mode all the way down there. And he feels really comfortable driving it in deep and allowing that arc to take shape. And he'll come out of there with a great start. That's what he likes to do. Tomac likes to do it. Hunter Lawrence likes to do it. But guess what? They're not here. So they're not going to be out there with him taking away some of that edge. So those little things I think set up nicely. So if you tell me that Justin Cooper's top three on the start in the main event, I'm just going to shrug my shoulders and say, yeah, the writing was on the wall with how this start was set up. The other thing with the Pittsburgh track is the whoops are different but similar. And what I mean by that is there are five jumps leading into the whoops. And if you think about Tampa, it was exactly the same. Now, Malcolm was really good there. And what he was doing was he was landing off the triple. He was going 2-3 and just absolutely ripping into the whoops. He was carrying all that speed in, where even Chase, didn't look comfortable. He was checking up. Cooper was definitely checking up, and Justin Cooper was jumping them completely. It's the same setup where if Chase Sexton feels comfortable and softer, they're going to be softer and more ruddy than Tampa's were. He's going to have the speed and momentum built up to where he's going to be able to drive into them, and that's going to be the question for Cooper Webb. Unless it rains, which it very likely could, right? But let's go with a static environment. That's going to be the ask of Cooper Webb is, hey, you've had a week to think about this. If Chase is going to rip through these whoops again with a ton of speed, what are you going to do about it? And we're going to find out because, again, weather permitting, I think that the effect will be the same. It's not a flat stretch coming in. It's not across the first turn, and none of those things. But the momentum going into the whoops where Chase is riding a wave of confidence into those is the dynamic that Cooper Webb's going to have to answer to. And again, I said it on the post show last weekend is I don't know right now that Cooper Webb has an answer. I can be actually really sure he didn't because I was watching him stare at the whoops and basically like, yeah, I don't really know how he was doing that. We may have a similar scenario set up this Saturday.
Well, it's certainly shaping up well, and yeah, awesome analysis. And you were definitely vindicated for your opinion and insight last weekend, mate. It was just proved to be spot on, and like it does so many times. But yeah, I guess that's really interesting about the Pittsburgh track. And do you reckon Webb feels any little bit of extra pressure? Obviously, he's still got a nice little advantage there, but those last two are sort of slated as chase tracks, obviously, like we say, depending on a lot of other factors. But it could be a little bit of a put that flex back on Chase this weekend and then put himself in a even more commanding position and sort of put it really on Chase in the last two. It should be pretty interesting, mate. And I guess like you said, the weather in Pittsburgh, and how is the excitement going back there? It's been many years since it's been there. Reports are the ticket sales are solid, engagement's pretty good. So just your thoughts on the pressure of Webb and just going back to Pittsburgh excitement levels.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people excited about this weekend. It's a really popular area of the country for motocross, supercross. If you think about, MX Sports is based there, so the head of GNCC Racing, which is a huge series here in the U.S. Racer X is located just an hour down the road. There's just a lot of central themed racing. The Steel City National that's now defunct was 45 minutes away. The High Point National is an hour away. So there's just a lot of, I think, people that have wanted to see this race happen for years are finally going to get their, kind of wish come true this weekend. So it's going to be a little bit of a homecoming type feel for a lot of people. And if you're listening to this from somewhere in the EU or Australia or whatever, I get it. You have no context for it. But just think about one of those events where it's like a regional event. Everybody has been waiting for this one race to happen at this one track for a very long time, and it's going to be, I think, a little bit of a reunion feel because everyone I've talked to is like, yeah, we have to go to Pittsburgh. Like, there's just no way we can miss that one. So that's going to be, I think, really fun to have on the docket. And when it comes to Webb, you hate to say it's a must win because he has a 9-point lead. If anybody is under the gun, it's Chase. But I really think that if Webb could upset the trend this weekend and steal one back and go back to 12, oh man, you hate to say it's over. That's never going to be the right thing to say with racing left. But man, would it really change the sentiment around this championship right now? And I'll be honest, I don't like the setup for Webb this weekend. I don't like the weather setup. I don't like the track setup. So his work's cut out for him. It's not going to be easy, but if the bare bones question is what changes this entire look and feel, is if Webb can find a way to beat Sexton this weekend. I don't care if he wins or gets second or fifth. If he finishes in front of the number four, the air is going to get sucked out of this championship for Sexton. That's my firm opinion.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating dynamic to see play out because obviously Webb did qualify faster than him in East Rutherford, and then obviously we saw what happened in the race with Chase just putting on a masterclass. Must have been pretty amazing to watch that in person from the track, just seeing him so much better than everyone else because it's like these guys are all absolutely elite, and there's usually fine margins between, first, second, and all the way back. But yeah, it was just impressive. So I guess what does the preparation look like for Webb? You know him and the star team, they're always doing that no stone unturned approach, looking for little edges, whether it's, trying different things with the bike, watering the track in preparation for mudders. So I wonder what it looks like, mate. I'm sure they've got a few tricks up their sleeve to help him as much as possible, though.
Yeah, I don't think you do anything too crazy different. If it were me, and that's really all I can give you, right? I don't, they're not going to go out and share a bunch of secrets, I don't think, but I would have some sort of setup in that scenario for blitzing whoops separately. Because typically, if you have really big whoops and need to blitz them only, you can go to a little bit stiffer setup. You can basically change the internals of the fork and the shock to give you more hold up. And when I say that, it's like to ride higher in the stroke. So he's going to have more confidence with entry speed. The front's not going to dip at all. The rear won't go deep in the stroke at all. So it gives you more margin for error because you're not going to ever get deep in the stroke. And getting deep in the stroke is where you get that violent reaction back, and then things go really sideways. So the reason why James Stewart and Chad Reed and those guys could go into the whoop so fast and felt as confident as they did is because their suspension was set up for it. It was incredibly stiff, and especially on the initial part of the engagement, like right at the very top, it was almost like a BMX bike. Like it didn't move at all. Well, that's great because you want the bike to stay level. And if your suspension doesn't really move, like, and it is moving a little bit, but it's so stiff that it's absorbing that impact without really moving. And if your suspension's not moving, guess what? Your body's not moving, and you're able to glide across the top of whoops. So that's in a nutshell is the theory. The downside of that and the trouble is you lose traction, you lose feel. It's really challenging. Like if the track gets a little rough and beat up, the bike just gets really rigid and really harsh in those scenarios because it's the same thing. It's not absorbing anything. You're absorbing all that impact because the suspension's not really moving at all. Think about like a hardtail mountain bike thing will beat the hell out of you compared to like full suspension. So that's where the trade-off is. And I think you would just have a setup for that. If like we get to Denver and the whoops are big and burly and you have to blitz them, you'd want to have that set up in your back pocket and say, okay, well, I'm just not going to be able to turn quite as well, but I'm not going to lose it in the whoops tonight. Like that is just not, I'm not going to allow Sexton to pull 20-second lead because of the whoops tonight. I'm not going to do it. Doesn't mean you have to use it. Doesn't mean you think that it's the right play, especially if they're going to break down in the main event or any of those things. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on setup. But I just think in the same vein of where you said they leave no stone unturned is having that setup to turn to if you really need it. And who's to say when you do, right? Like you could argue that if he went to it and it didn't work for him, and what if he got beat by AP or Justin Cooper or Malcolm or Roxon because he couldn't ride the bike well? Like that's a real risk. You take a big swing with the bike setup and you don't get second at least, that's a catastrophic problem. So there's some really hard decision making that has to go on there. But that's what I think they'll be looking at is how do we find an answer for the whoops if we need it moving forward? Because what happened last weekend, that can't be it. You can't be 20 seconds down because of, it wasn't all one section, but the majority was.
Yeah, definitely gave him plenty of things to think about, and he'll definitely come out swinging like he always does. That mindset's dialed. He's so determined, ferocious competitor. So we'll look to see it. And I guess, do you have someone that you'd give an edge? Obviously, do you see Chase winning out? Do you see Cooper Webb finding a way like he usually does? I guess it's what we're all watching it for. And Also, do you see anyone else able to take points off them? I guess AP's the prime candidate at this point. I think, what, four podiums in the last five, including a win. Starts have been pretty solid. He's obviously got his future confirmed. He's looking really good. He had a great battle with Barsha as well. He's definitely got the speed, so he could mix it up there. But I guess on the other side of the coin, do these guys just want to get out of the way as well and just let these two Chase and Webb battle it out and not be a spoiler as well?
Yeah, they're definitely not going to want to be a part of the championship conversation. Now, that doesn't mean they don't want to get wins and podiums for themselves. So it's a little bit dicey for where, Justin Cooper and AP especially are involved. Kenny, I don't think he cares. He's just going to do his thing. But AP is on KTM, but he's super good friends with Cooper Webb. And then Justin Cooper is incredibly close friends with Cooper Webb. So he's not going to want to, if he's in second and Coop's coming from the back, I can't imagine a world where Justin Cooper is like, yeah, man, I'm just gonna hold it here and not give those points back. Like I cannot imagine that would ever happen. Not after how many times Cooper Webb has gone to bat for him. I just don't think that exists in any world. So Webb does have Justin Cooper in his back pocket, I believe. AP, yeah, I just think he's gonna try to not be a factor. Whatever happens, happens, but he doesn't want to be a headline in that story. And you ask about the last three. I mean, really, I think Sexton, especially in the last two, has the edge. The dirt composition, uh, just you can't use the insides at any of those tracks where Webb wants to be. You have to go to the berm because it's really hard pack. So it all that sets up really nicely for Chase. That's why I say it's so important this weekend. If we get kind of inclement conditions, maybe not, maybe if it's not muddy, but it's just tricky, that helps Webb. Like Webb has, I think he really has to do it this weekend. You can't assume that Sexton's going to win the last two, but I truly believe Sexton has a clear advantage at the last two events based on what they do well, whoop build, dirt composition, line choice, all those things really favor Chase. So what you don't want to do is put that setup in front of Chase and say, all you have to do is execute, man, and there's nothing Webb can do about it. You do not want to be in that spot. So I think it's so cliche to say like, oh, this weekend's more important than the others because they're all the same points and all that. Like it, I don't think that really holds water, but there is some sort of sub story here where this weekend, because of the variables I mentioned, it matters a lot. I really think this is a big one.
Oh, it's going to be so good. And just quickly before we move down the list, have you got any sort of silly season takes? Have you got any predictions where we see some of these guys like Tomac, Anderson, Mookie? Obviously, looks like Cooper and Plessinger are pretty well sorted. So it's going to be pretty, interesting to see these moves getting made, and they'll be getting finalised pretty soon as well, won't they? So a lot to come out soon with some of these heavy hitters' futures, isn't there?
Yeah, I think I think Justin Cooper is locked in. I think I heard that he signed. If he didn't, I think that's all but done for him to stay there. And you can start to draw kind of lines from that because I think if he's staying, that means that Tomac's not going to be there. There's just no way they would be able to afford all of that. So that for me hearing that Justin Cooper's staying, that means that Tomac's not. I don't have that under authority. I'm just deducing, if I was an investigator, that's what the conclusion I would come to. I think, as we mentioned, I think Sexton's going to go to Cali. I think that's happening. AP is going to stay at KTM. I think that's done. So the rest of the questions become about, where does Anderson go? Where does Tomac go? Does Deegan stay at Star? There are a lot of storylines that have to unfold pretty quickly, and some of the dominoes are falling. Sexton was the first one. That was a huge one. I think the next big name that has kind of to make a decision would be Tomac. And, unfortunately for Tomac, he doesn't have the leverage that he used to. He's older, he's been injured. So, you know, there was a time, I would just say even a year or two ago, where there's no way in a million years would Yamaha make a move without him being first to be done. Well, that happens to everybody. Father Time's undefeated. And I just think they're looking at it and saying, yeah, man, I'm sorry at, however old he is now, with the injuries and the things you've dealt with, and there, we can't give you $2.5 million moving forward. They want to invest in the future, and no different than any other rider in history. Eli Tomac is running into that time frame where he's not the future anymore. He might be the present, maybe for 2026, but he's definitely not the future long term. And that's how these people think. The decision makers are looking at, hey, if we're going to spend these millions of dollars, we need to be getting returns from them on a marketing level for the next years to come, right? Like 5 years, 6 years. They don't sign them for that long, but that's what they're thinking about. That's where they're going to have that brand identity and all the residual value over years is they want the long term there. So it's just a tough thing. I think a very um, logical landing spot for Tomac would be KTM, which I know sounds crazy, but if they're going to lose Sexton, which I believe they are, I mean I can't imagine that Plessinger is their championship answer. As good as he's riding, he's I don't think he's ready for that type of expectation. And where else are they really going to go? I don't know. Vial's definitely not a 450 championship guy right now. He's not even winning a 250 championship at the moment. So I don't know. There's a lot of puzzle pieces getting moved around. But again, that first Sexton piece, even though it's not official and you won't hear anything official until October, that was the first piece that had to come off the board. And I think it is. So things are starting to happen now.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool to see, mate. Awesome insight there. And obviously, like you said, with KTM and Vial, if he wins, has to go 450. Another conundrum that would probably mean whatever happens, they might just run Juju on 250. So a lot of interesting stuff. And with Pro Circuit, have you heard much about their lineup for next year? I believe there was an option for Ty Masterpool, whether they take that up. I'm not sure. Garrett was 1 year, wasn't he? So there could be a few changes in the offing there too, couldn't there?
Yeah, it's going to be a big summer. I don't think there are a ton of riders that are waiting in the wings, if that makes sense. So that's a good thing for the current team. But I think Masterpool has to have a big summer, or else, honestly, why would they renew him? If he doesn't come out and win and be the guy he was last summer, I can't imagine that he would stay. And I don't think anybody could blame them. But I think there's a chance he does. He's fantastic motocross rider, so he just has the pressure to perform now. Where if he had had an average Supercross season and then a good motocross season, I think he'd be fine. I think they would keep him around. But now, when you haven't raced at all, you have to perform. You have to. But McAdoo's locked up. I could see them bringing Marchbanks back, and he kind of falls into this nice area where there just aren't a ton of riders that are ready to step up and need a spot, in my opinion. Marchbanks is significantly better than Landon Gordon or Enzo Temmerman or any of the guys ready to move out of the amateurs. So I think that kind of saves the guys on the bubble as far as getting moved out, because Mitch is going to look around and say, well, I don't see anybody that can beat my current roster. So why would I change it?
Yeah, it'll be good to see it. Obviously, Shimoda, there was a bit of talk about him potentially not staying with HRC. Does he go to a team like Husky? Does he stay on a Japanese brand, go back to PC? There's options for him too. Where do you see him going for next year?
I think honestly, for all parties, I think they would be smart to keep him. It's the same kind of theme. I just thought like he won a race this year. Like he is a podium guy in 250 Supercross. He's gonna be a podium guy in 250 Motocross. Like he just is. That's where a healthy Joe Shimoda is, and it's not his fault he got hit with a pit board at San Diego. This championship would look very different if he had not gotten hit by that pit board. So I think Honda understands that. I think Joe's pretty easy to kind of get along with. He's incredibly polite. And really, like Hymas has had his struggles for sure. We'll see what motocross brings. But if you're Honda HRC, where are you going to go? Who are you going to bring in that can beat Shimoda? I don't see anybody, because Davies is not up, right? There's no way they're letting him go. You're definitely not getting Deegan, nor do they want him, because of the Lawrence thing. So I think if you're them, you look around and yeah, I don't think there's anywhere to go. Like maybe, I guess they could take a look at Vial if he doesn't point out or something. Like there's just not many options. So for a guy like Shimoda, who I think is deserving anyway, I would be trying to lock him up if I was Honda.
Yeah, it'd be a smart move. There's so many things in the favour as well. And just that continuity of third year on that bike, you can make some good strides. And he showed he's already making that. And he is an exceptional rider in his own right, like you said, mate. So, on the topic of Honda, I guess back to the racing. Pretty cool, Dean Wilson, on obviously a fly racer as well, getting the top 10 in ninth. I think the arm pop's pretty brutal for him, but it's just awesome to have him out there. He's doing his thing, enjoying the racing, and the fans are definitely loving it. Opening ceremonies, all that's pretty cool. And another guy on a Honda, Ferrandis, top five for him. He probably wanted that ride for sure. He was keen for it. He's got a few bits and pieces from Honda, like factory transmission is a big help. You know how beneficial these things are, and obviously it's cool to be getting noticed, even though he wanted that full bike. But just a few words on Wilson and Ferrandis. Good to see them doing well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's something we don't really get to talk about, and also it's tough to really talk about or speculate on things like this. But Ferrandis definitely wanted that HRC spot. Like he was lobbying for it pretty hard, and he obviously didn't get it. We know that. But I think he feels a little passed over, for the choice of Dino. And so I think his motivation's a little higher. Like he definitely wants to beat Dino. And I think every time he goes out there, he's just like, I'm going to show you guys that you picked the wrong guy. But the hard part of that is I think if you're Brandon Wilson, if you're Lars Lindstrom, the decision makers at Honda, for Dylan to get fifth, which is a fantastic result, I don't know. It's not really doing much for them. Like they're not going to steal headlines. They're not going to get a ton of coverage. Like we barely show Dylan on TV. It's great, but I think for Honda, they were looking at something a little different. They wanted Dino's personality. They wanted the social media coverage. They wanted to continue to change their image, their public image, and become more likable worldwide. And they have made such great inroads with that over the last, I don't know, 5 years, let's say. They've just become a team that seems to be having fun. And that was not Honda's image or perception for decades, right? And I think to their own, um, I think they were honestly trying to be that. They wanted to look the most professional, the most serious. They really put off that image, and I don't think they shied away from it at all. But now it's just not that anymore. I think they want people to understand that, yeah, we take this racing thing really seriously, but also we can have fun doing it, right? There's a time and a place. And I think for people also, we're a consumer driven industry. It's this sport is want to, nobody has to buy a dirt bike. Nobody has to go riding on the weekends or do anything like. So if people don't have to buy something, then you really want to be on the influential side of the want to. And if you see this team having so much fun and they're laughing and winning and their bikes look great and all that, like that just gives you a better feeling about the brand. And I think that was lost on Honda for a very long time. And I give Lars Lindstrom so much credit for changing that narrative because I've been watching this team for 40 years or as long as I can have any coherent memory. And this is, I think, the best image as far as likability. Professionalism is really never wavered, but as far as do I like these Honda guys or not, this is about the best I've ever seen it.
Yeah, they're certainly doing a great job. And obviously, with Dino, it probably helps if they're doing those factory fan zones as well. Obviously, the Lawrence brothers go to select races, but you being a pioneer as that, mate, Dean Wilson is definitely a good addition to that as well. Probably more so with the fan interaction engagement than Ferrandis would have been, kind of a more serious stick to himself, maybe more of the old HRC image in Ferrandis. So, how's that all going? Obviously, Dan Truman's doing an awesome job helping steer that ship, but that obviously adds to Dino's worth on that side of things too.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't know if Honda really cares so much about selling the VIP experience. I don't think they have a real vested interest in that. But I will tell you what does matter is Dino's social media presence, the Grandpa Earl side, his vlog, all those things matter. And if you're any corporate company, you're trying to get younger. As a general policy, you're trying to develop customers for the next 20 years. Well, you do that by engaging with them in the way that they absorb media. And for most kids right now, it's YouTube, it's Instagram, it's social media of any kind, TikTok, whatever. Well, guess who's probably the best at that in our sport as a rider? That's Dino. So you give a rider who's available as a feel-good story, who's on his way out where there's no expectation, who has the best social media game of anybody going. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer decision, for Honda to do that. So it just makes way too much sense for them to have gone this route.
Yeah, he just keeps them relevant, that feel good factors there. So yeah, a lot of boxes ticked, like you said, mate. And obviously lastly, 250 class, how do you see it playing out? Hammaker, Hampshire, Vial, obviously starting track position condition. East Rutherford pretty heavily, but it's looking like it's coming down to the fight with those three. Would have been awesome if we had Kitchen and Anstey still in there, and even Hymas. He was sort of, making a push as well. But yeah, I guess it's hard to see with obviously RJ still looks like he's struggling a bit. Vial, hard to see him clawing those points back to get back into contentions by winning. So it's looking like sets to lose at this point. Obviously, a lot of racing still to go, but this little home swing around has been good to him. He's loving it, and like you said, mate, he's found that consistency, continuity. The errors are diminished. He's dealing with the pressure. Everything's looking pretty up for him, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think we'll just have to see. You said BL, right?
Yeah, just hard to see him clawing those points back, isn't it?
Yes, man. I'll go back to what I said about Webb, but I'll take it to the extreme. I said this was kind of a really important like make or break weekend for Webb. This is back against the wall. You simply have to win if you're VL. Now, racing, anything can happen. But when I watched last year at Salt Lake, Tom really struggled with the pressure. He got like the last spot, or he barely qualified for the main, and then he really struggled in the main. You could just see the moment was really tough for him. So doesn't mean he'll have the same struggles, but clearly the track wasn't working for him, the situation wasn't working for him. So you can't go in there and expect that he's going to win the showdown and just dominate and close a bunch of points down. Like I don't think that is likely, if even possible. So he has to put himself in a situation where he's at least even, right? And the only way to even come close to that is winning Pittsburgh. So I believe his backup is up against the wall this weekend. And it's not life or death, right? He can get third in the championship and life will go on. He's still already a champion. He'll start thinking about pro motocross. I don't want it to be more dramatic than it needs to be. But if the end all be all goal is to win this championship, and it's hard to think it's not, to get to make a pathway for that to happen, I cannot stress enough how important winning this weekend would be in that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And just some words on RJ. Obviously, he'll be stepping up to the 450 in motocross. Do you think he's healthy enough to do it? How's he all going with that? Because it's seeming like he's got a fair bit of adversity with that injury still, mate. But obviously, he'd be a great addition to what's going to be a stacked 450 opener at Parlour, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen there. His wrist is really not good. So I think, him racing pro motocross, I don't think was even in question until recently. And where it really comes down is I think he's looking at the schedule and he's looking at, okay, well, I certainly can't jeopardize 2026 because of my wrist again. Like he's just battling this thing every single day. So I think he's looking at what's the lesser of two evils. Do I forego this summer and get it fixed, and then at least I'm 100% prepared for 2026, or do I continue battling this wrist thing, taping it? It's not a fun existence for him right now with his wrist. Like it's every single day is a battle just to be able to even compete, which is in the end not sustainable. That is not a sustainable situation to be dealing with. So you just come into this, I think you start thinking about it, you start gaming it out, and really it comes down to, well, if it's inevitable that I have to get this fixed, like doctors are telling me it's not going to heal itself. There's no natural regeneration going on. Like rest is not the answer. Like I'm going to have to get a procedure. I think in that scenario, you have to probably do it in May. Like you race Salt Lake and you go get it done. And that's a really crappy answer because remember, this was the same wrist that he got hurt. He hurt at this very time last year. If he gets it fixed in May, it would be the exact same surgery or similar in the exact same time frame. And then you just start all over again over the summer, recover, therapy, start riding again. Like it's just a really vicious cycle. These, especially heavy injuries are. But I don't know that there's another answer. I really don't. And I'm not a doctor. I don't know the exact nature of his injury, but from talking to him, it's a real problem. It is something where it's debilitating and he's barely able to ride. And that's, yeah, if it's that bad, you can't just expect it to continue in perpetuity. That's definitely not going to happen.
Yeah, great insight, mate. Really frustrating for him to be going through that again. And yeah, considering the results he's been getting, super impressive. But yeah, it must be so hard, like holding on through the whoops for him and all that. And like another guy that had a big knock on the weekend, Hymus, how's he tracking after that crash? It was a big one. I believe he's okay, generally speaking, but he was so fast and the improvements in Supercross have been there for all to see this season. And, he's absolutely elite outdoors. So hopefully, he's firing on all cylinders for that because he could be a real title contender to give Deegan a run for his money, couldn't he?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting fight. I think there are a lot of guys that are all, Supercross is kind of over for a lot of guys. Hymus and some of these guys are like, yeah, well, blew that, right? But I can be in this thing for motocross. So that it's funny how that turn happens where Deegan and all these guys are like still locked in, but they're thinking about Supercross, and then other guys are just like, nope, to hell with that. I'm all in on motocross, and they start really leaning into that because it's an opportunity for them to turn the page and to kind of go back to zeros, right? Whatever issues they had, Shimoda's in that boat. There are a bunch of guys that are certainly capable, and this is their opportunity to get ahead of the game. And when I say get ahead of the game, they can really lean into riding motocross now, where sure, they're going to want to do well at Salt Lake and all those things, but practicing, changing their bicycle strategy, their motos, like they probably won't practice Supercross anymore at all because they realize that practicing motocross every single day right now is going to give them a leg up on the Supercross championship contenders because RJ, Hammaker, Deegan, Vial to a certain extent, all those guys are locked in. They're locked in the Supercross, and for good reason. They should be, but that's just going to put them a little bit further behind and a little bit further behind and a little bit further behind throughout the month of, well, we're almost done with April. But I would think that some of these guys like Shimoda's probably been motoing outdoors for a while now because why wouldn't he? He knew the championship was over. So you set your eyes and your thought process on the next championship. And I would expect Hymus to really shift. Like after this weekend didn't go well, I would bet you he's probably done riding Supercross. I would be like if I made a goal with Honda that motocross is the goal. I'd be damned if I was wasting time practicing Supercross with, one round and a showdown to go when it's virtually over now. Like 15 points going into last weekend. Okay, I get it. You need to stay kind of mentally here, but now that's out. So you lean all the way into motocross at this point.
Yeah, it's really interesting shift in how it happens almost immediately. It's just like a week and then they're straight into the other discipline of this sport, mate. So it's pretty interesting for him for sure. And as we wrap this one up, mate, any final thoughts? Obviously, we had the MXGP issues with Geyser having a crash. Looks like he's dislocated the shoulder, had to wait 30 minutes on the side of the track for treatment. So that wasn't ideal, but it sort of brought that championship fight to life. And yeah, just what's the rest of the week look like for you and the weekend ahead, mate? Should be another cracking round of action, even though it'll certainly keep you busy.
Yeah, it was that was tough to watch for Geiser, man. He's so likable, and for him to crash and for it to be such a silly obstacle on the side of the track be a factor was hard to watch. You got to feel for him. Like he's just such a nice guy, right? Like I was over the moon that Lucas Kunin won, but I don't want to see that happen to anybody, let alone Geiser. But let's see what happens with the X-ray or the MRI. Hopefully he can be back, and it's not anything too serious because that would be devastating. Like the guy has been the best the best rider in the field. Like there's no one that can argue that has not been the best rider. So for him to have an extended injury now, when I mean he had a full race lead going in, that would be pretty devastating. So we'll see. It's just, I think it's another lesson of how brutal this sport can be. I think everybody was like, well, Geiser's winning another world title. And then now everything's in question. We just have no idea where this thing goes now. So guys like Renault, Fevre looks like he's ready to come on. Like he's been riding fantastic anyway, but now, man, his eyes have to be as big around as, coffee saucers. So just it's going to completely change the face of the series, especially depending on how long Tim Geiser has to sit out.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting, mate. And obviously, thank you again for joining us on this one. It's been another awesome chat ahead of Pittsburgh. So much going on in the moto world at the moment. So we could be chatting for ages, but we'll wrap it up there, mate. And obviously, massive shout out to Fly Racing. Make sure you follow Fly Racing on social media. Check out flyracing.com. Visit your local dealer, and obviously cheer for all Fly Racing athletes in the SMX World Championships and in MXGP. So obviously, cheers again, JT. Been an awesome chat, mate. Thanks again for your insights and opinion, and we look forward to catching up next week.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here.
No worries, mate. Have a good one.